Welcome to The Anxious Voyage. If you think that title sounds bleak or foreboding, one of two things must be true. You're very lucky, or you need to get out more. On this program, we share stories of life and living. We compare notes. We discover commonalities. We accept that life is a glorious, heartbreaking thing, and we embrace and celebrate all of it. Take the ride with us. We're glad you're here. Now, here's your host, Mark O'Brien.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. We are coming to you again, and as always, from world headquarters in Middletown, Connecticut, the home of this weekend's, right on the Connecticut River, annual jet-powered paddle boat racing. And if you're at all concerned about these kinds of things, yes, emergency first responders will be standing by. I like to say that every one of these shows is special. Some of them are just more special than other ones. And this one is indeed special because I am really happy to welcome back my friend and my guest, Dennis Pitocco. This conversation will actually be amazing for a lot of reasons that you're about to discover. And Dennis, before we get officially started, I want to let you know that you were a guest on my very first show of this year, the very first show ever. This is the last show of my first year.
So I'm your bookend, Mark.
You are my bookend, and you handle it well. So welcome, and thank you for being here. I will also say that we extend best wishes to your wife, Allie, who planned to join us today, but has taken ill, and we do hope she recovers.
Thanks, Mark.
You and Allie, I just want to jump right in here. You and Allie have just completed the pilgrimage of the Camino de Santiago, which, as I said before we went on the air, is more in its entirety, more than I can wrap my head around. So I don't know if there's any way to put in any meaningful order the kinds of things you learned or the kinds of things that you would want to share with us. But if you wouldn't mind, just pick a place and start.
Great, Mark. Thank you for that. And let me just say, during our pilgrimage, we knew this was coming up, and we really look forward to it. I'm really sorry Allie can't be here because she can balance my enthusiasm with her smile. But let me just back up, because what we've learned just in the last week since we've been back, when we mentioned Camino de Santiago, amazing how many people have never heard of it. Like us, 10 years ago, we had never heard of it. So just to put it in perspective, we started in the town of Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, France, and we ended up in Santiago Compostela, Spain. What does that mean? That means we were walking effectively for 40 days. It was a 500-mile pilgrimage, truly out in the wilderness, starting in France, and then, of course, ending in northwest Spain. We covered 1.3 million miles, as Allie's quick to remind me. And then we finally found our way back home last week. So
I think maybe you mean 1.3 million steps.
Oh, I'm sorry, steps. Yeah. Miles.
That would be a lot of miles.
Steps. You're right. See, this is why she should be there, because I'm known to exaggerate. So that wrapped up just a little over a week ago, Mark. And, because of what I do for a living, and before I left, I said to many people, I will tell my story or our story when we get back. I'll tell you, Mark, the two hardest parts about the journey, the first one occurred about 50 miles from the end of it. We were about, 38, 39 days into it. And it started to dawn on us that it was going to be over soon. Now, when you hear the story of the literal uphill climb, the physical endurance, the mental fatigue, I mean, just all the things that wrap into that kind of a journey, because it certainly wasn't a walk in the park. People said, "You must be nuts, 50 miles to go and you want to keep going?" I said, "Yes." And so the second hardest part, and I didn't realize this until we got back, was trying to put it into words.
Mhm.
And the experience, again, I did publish an article. I think you've seen it, but um, after talking it through with Ali several times, we're going to do something we said we would never do. We're actually going to write a book about it,
Good for you.
because we think we almost feel obligated, an overwhelming obligation, just to not only carry forward the wisdom for our own good that we've been blessed to absorb, but make it maybe a roadmap for other people, because it ain't just about the walk. It's really about what you leave behind and what you bring forward. And we are bringing so much wisdom forward into what we call our post Camino life. It is, people say it's game changing, it's life changing. And I'm not one to exaggerate, but let me just say it's game changing. It is life changing. We are not the same people that took that first step on the trail back on May 19th. And little did we know how much it was going to change us. So, wow, it's just a remarkable experience. And you're going to hear me use the word blessed a lot, because, who gets to check out of life for 2 months and go do a walk in the middle of nowhere? So we are blessed to be able to do, which again increases what we think is the obligation to spread some of that experience to people that will never have an opportunity to do it.
And I'm particularly struck by the phrase life changing, because um, we can deliberately do different things now and then, change our routines, whatever, go to different places. But to be, and I really don't like the term disconnected, but
Mm.
to be disconnected for 40 plus days, to be on your feet, I'm guessing almost all day for 40
Right.
plus days,
Right.
and to be in places on your feet that you've never been before, um, that is quite literally life changing. And I don't know if it's too soon yet to answer this question, but when you say that you're not the same people who left, can you at this point can you even begin to discuss how and why you're different now?
Um, wow. I can't answer the question entirely, because there were so many pieces of that journey that were a wake-up call for us in different ways. I can tell you, we came back with just an overwhelming strength of conviction when it comes to a number of things, simplifying our existence. Some of the things you hear out there or you read about, being present, you hear that stuff, but my goodness, when you get into that repetitive nature of walking for hours and hours and hours every day, you're almost in a meditative state. I think if you're a runner, Mark, you would call it that zone that people get into. So suddenly you're intensely aware of all your surroundings. You're finding peace by being just present in that moment. And let me back up. One of the best analogies, I think, is just imagine plopping yourself down in what I'll call a parallel universe for 6 weeks, and you're devoid of a world that feels rushed and materialistic and disconnected, using that word, and all the other darkness that might be out there these days. Take away all that noise and all that distraction and just replace it with what we started to refer to as the symphony of silence. It's just
Mhm.
nature, pure, untouched by mankind. And it's amazing, because within the first week, all those, as I like to call, all those post-it notes in my brain disappeared. I mean, you're stripping yourself bare and you're getting down to what I'll call your authentic self. And that's where you start to figure out, wait a minute, what am I going to leave behind? Because I have an opportunity here. I'm checked out for a couple of months here. So you start intentionally talking about things. And, Allie and I have lived together 24/7, and we work together for almost 20 years and you think you know each other. As I've said to so many people, imagine you think you know your wife, you think you know your fiance, you think you know your partner, your family, whoever is your friends. Try walking 500 miles in the wilderness because you start to experience every possible emotion because of the terrain, because of the mental issues, because of things like grief, which I'll talk about in a little while, and all the pretense and all the imposter syndrome stuff is gone. So we're seeing pieces of ourselves, Mark, that as much as we know each other, we never drilled that deeper. And it was a test, for lack of a better term. And just as a side note, I got this up on my wall here. I started writing about a week into the trip at night when we stopped, and you're exhausted. But I started jotting down some notes, and Allie thought I was doing a journal, and I wasn't. I just felt compelled to start writing down one word every evening to say, this is what I felt about Allie that day. This is what I experienced. And at the end of it, I got this ripped piece of paper in front of me. It's got all the words. At the end, on the very last day, on the very last dinner, if you will, I handed it to her and I said, that's what I've been up to. And talk about a tearful experience. Now, she knows I feel all those things, but when do you stop and say those things? And it was coming to the surface because there was nothing else cluttering my brain. And I said, I need to do this. So I'm way off on a tangent here, Mark, but wow.
No, it's not a tangent, and I was going to say it's funny. It's not at all funny. When you first started on that particular thread of this conversation, the first word I wrote over here was clutter.
Wow.
So, I mean, it makes absolute sense.
Well,
given everything that you were compelled to think and feel and examine, is it still fair to say that actually was a process of simplifying?
oh boy. The words that come to mind when you say that are liberating, cleansing, again, getting rid of any, not that we wear masks, but everybody seems to have a persona. Well, that leaves you on the Camino because the one thing you start to feel, regardless, and remember, we're talking, let me see, this year, an average of 2,000 people started the Camino every day on average this year. So we're not, as much as that sounds, oh, there's a giant crowd of people, we didn't see them, Mark, for hours. But when you do, you got this immediate sense of we're all in this together. And there are nationalities from around the world, just they are there for you. Talk about a sense of community and connection. It happens immediately because, you stop on the sidelines for a minute because maybe you want to adjust your shoes. The first thing you hear beyond the words Buen Camino, which means good journey from everybody, is, can I help you? Do you need anything? Because people just know, they get it. They know what you're up against. They know what you're experiencing because they're experiencing the same thing in different ways. So maybe that brings in connection, it brings in community, it brings in, you're opening the door and letting all this stuff in despite your discomfort. And you're letting go, I think you're letting go of control, things like that.
Our friend Andy Scarantino said to us once that there was something comforting and meditative about the constant thump, thump, thump of her feet when she's running. I haven't been a runner in a long time. I have never even considered the idea of walking 500 miles, but I've done 100-mile bike rides on consecutive days. And I was thinking about this when you were saying in the last 50 miles, it started dawning on you that this was going to have to end. And I joke sometimes when people ask me, well, how do you ride 100 miles on a bike? I say, well, when you get to 99, don't stop. but there is something in recognizing that meditative state and the physical discomfort is absolutely part of it. There's something about knowing that's going to come to an end, and it isn't just relief. There's some kind of sadness about it. And
Mark, sorry for interrupting. You hit that word properly. Sadness is what was setting in those last 50 miles. And as much as we had to come back, and I hate to call it the real world, we just came back to whatever. It was difficult. How do you take all that and preserve it, if you will, in a world that there's a natural force field of resistance, it seems. But it also gave us, Mark, just another, I'm going to use the word overwhelming again, a determination to do more. And what do I mean by that? For over a decade, we've been, as you know, on a quest to rediscover humanity. And that continues, obviously. But we said it's time to shift or make more shift happen when it comes to sharing that humanity. Because it dawned on us, yeah, we may be walking this, and we always felt like we were up against climbing uphill in that quest these days to rediscover humanity. We've seen some glimmers of hope along the way, but we've also realized that some people, they need a roadmap. They need to know more. But what do you mean by that? How do we rediscover humanity? So we're shifting what we do to shared humanity. What does that mean? That means we got to do more. We got to walk our talk even more. And we're already talking about things that we can do to make that happen. Call it a manifesto, call it whatever you want. But we're not going to take any prisoners here. We're just going to do it.
And it's funny how I quite frequently equate the notion of pilgrimage with quest. And on the quest that you've established for yourself with 360 Nation and everything that entails, in your quest for rediscovering humanity, did the experience of the Camino suggest to you that maybe it's understanding better where to look?
Yes, because it's there, Mark. But you got to add back to my opening comments. You really have to take away all that clutter. Let's use that word. And it starts to creep back in things like authenticity and, purpose and your intention and I mean, you got to let it in. And we think we have an obligation now back to writing a book or telling the story or doing what you and I are doing today to share more of it, because maybe the word disconnected doesn't work, but just take a couple of days and enjoy nature, turn off the phone, get away from people. I'm going to go off on another segue here, but Allie was laughing because as we got deeper into this walk, everybody makes the walk whatever they want it to be. So we can't control that. And people have different reasons. But as it got quieter and as we got up into those hills and among the vineyards, and we don't see a human being for hours, when you finally hear a human being or groups of them, and then maybe they're laughing and it started to irritate me. I said, I just want the symphony of silence. I don't want anybody interrupting my world. So what we started doing, as strange as it may sound, we would stop, let them pass us and get enough distance that the silence would come back. And
that doesn't sound strange. And I was going to say, when I was talking about cycling, that there have been times when I've been so into that zone and even living with the discomfort that if someone comes alongside me and starts to talk, it's kind of it's somewhere between irritating and shattering, because you're in that silence, which is
yes.
so enlightening, and then bang, somebody just poof, pops you right out of it.
Amen. That was the experience. So, gee. Anyhow, so we recognize those kind of things during the Camino, saying, look, this stuff is out there, the simplicity, the peace and quiet, the presence. We just have to bring it back. There's no rocket science, as you know, in humanity. We've lost our way, perhaps, And maybe Allie and I feel an obligation because we're blessed enough to be able to do it to kind of help people with that compass. And we're going to do that.
All right, I'm going to take this opportunity for our first commercial break, because there's something I want to share with you at the beginning of the next segment, and I absolutely want to hear what you have to say about grief.
Okay.
And I'm not going to be at all surprised if that grief connects with joy.
Mm.
So we will be back momentarily. Please stay with us.
And we're back.
Okay, sorry, Rachel, I was expecting a commercial.
I can't get it to click.
Okay. All right, so we'll just start the next segment then. Dennis, I think you're familiar, because I've probably shared it on other occasions, with a poem called The Invitation. But
Yes,
this is how it ends. It doesn't interest me where or what or with whom you've studied. I want to know what sustains you from the inside when all else falls away. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself, and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments. And
wow.
You said something a few minutes ago about, well, it was related to authenticity, but about having the determination to sort of face yourself. And,
Yes.
and I hope this makes sense. So I'll just share it. A couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to go to a local Barnes and Noble for a book signing event. And one of the other authors who was there was a guy named Greg Dillon, who's a former police officer, FBI agent, and investigator for the Connecticut Chief State's Attorney's Office. He's written a book called The Thin Blue Lie. And it was about his recognition that in order to preserve his own integrity, he was going to have to become what we would now popularly call a whistleblower, and report a bunch of stuff that was going on that was utterly inappropriate and illegal. He knew what it was likely to cost him, and he did it anyway. At least at the outset, I have to believe that the idea of taking on a 500-mile excursion on foot has to be daunting. Were there any thoughts like that? Were you at all aware of what, not only what you're going to gain from it, but what it might cost you?
No. Well, not before we left. I can tell you, we're about the hardest day when it comes to the physical. When I say hardest physical, there's also the mental side of this, which I can get into later. But the hardest day, believe it or not, is the very first day of the trip. You're literally starting in France, and you're going up the Pyrenees Mountains. It's to the point, Mark, that because of the massively, quickly changing weather conditions, if you get to the bottom of that mountain, you're ready to go up, they may stop you and say it's closed. And we were so determined to time it, not that you can time it because you can't predict it. We wanted to be going up there. Now, having said that, we got about halfway up there because it was a day that they would let you through. And you know, I turned to Allie, I said, what were we thinking? Because the physical side of it, now this is our first stretch. It's not like walking for 20 miles and kind of getting your legs as a walker. We're going uphill, and it's not a paved path. It is the side of a mountain that's made of shale. So you're experiencing all this stuff. You've got your poles, you've got some other people, and then you got the weather changing. Conditions go from rain to hail to beautiful sunshine. I mean, that's where we get into some of the grief on what happened on that trip. But we were certainly, I was scratching my head halfway up there saying, oh my God. And this is only, my goodness, we couldn't have been more than 5 miles into the trip with, 495 miles to go. So yes, that changed over time, but wow.
And so is that was it those kinds of realizations that precipitated the grief?
No, actually, the grief was not prompted by that at all. The grief was prompted by, there's two things that happened on this trip that, people always say it's a wake-up call when somebody loses their life or somebody passes away and life is too short. Well, day one of our Camino, right behind us. Now, we just happened to be there. We get up early. We're probably one of the first ones going up the side of the Pyrenees Mountains. And we made it through that day. The very next day, we were getting feedback from other travelers. You can go online and find it if you want when you get to your albergue, or people just telling you. The group that left after us the next morning, they literally, the local, I'm going to call them police. They're not called police over there. They shut down the climb. They said, you can go, but you can't go up like we did the day before. Some American decided he was better than that. And he got about 3/4 of the way up and they found him the next day. He had hypothermia. He died of hypothermia. And day two, now we're on the second day now. We've made it through that first climb. And we're on day two. We're about, I don't know, day two was about, I think, a 15-mile walk. We're well into the walk. And we passed a number of people, and you're doing your boing caminos, and everybody's kind of cheerful because you got that big first day behind you and you survived. We started seeing helicopters coming overhead, and we just couldn't imagine why they were coming because there was nothing going on around us. There, we saw occasional walkers here and there. We finally get to the end that day, and we get stopped at our they call them albergues, which is kind of a cross between a hotel and just a place to stay, very fundamental. And we saw these rescue vehicles, and we saw helicopters, and we saw these guys sitting in front of the albergue in the emergency jackets, just exhausted. We come to find out that one of the pilgrims that we had passed earlier that day ventured off the path and went down a ravine, and they found his body the next day. The grief is because we saw that guy. We knew who he was. He was one of our fellow travelers. And well, unlike when you're hiking in America where there's a warning sign everywhere, you just have to stay in the game. He was probably taking a picture. He wasn't paying attention. I mean, you are at the edge of precipice all the time. So that was a wake-up call in a lot of ways. So the grief was there, but to have it right in front of you 2 days in a row. And again, this is 2 days into a 40-day pilgrimage. So our awareness went up of just how, valuable life is, but how quickly it could slip away. And you add that to all the other lessons, that stays with you. Now, you mentioned the joy, the word joy.
Yeah.
And that probably came from as we were getting towards the end, the way we were changing. You kind of start to realize I'm leaving a lot of stuff behind here. Things aren't that important anymore. So we're kind of leaving our old selves. There was a quote, I probably have it here, that, as you know, I kind of gravitate towards quotes. And here's one I put in the article. Maybe the journey isn't so much about becoming anything. Maybe it's about unbecoming everything that isn't really you, so you can be who you were meant to be in the first place. I don't know who wrote that, but boy, that just talked about our journey because we left so much behind, but it also got us focused on, all right, we're leaving that behind. What are we taking forward? What are we going to do about that? The other part of the joy, and this kind of contradicts the grief side of the trip, things we noticed. We're about 5 days into the trip, and we're climbing up this I mean, just steep climb, and it's taken everything we got because our legs are still getting used to it, and our feet got some blisters and blah, blah. And this gentleman comes walking up with poles, but right by us and just keeps. And then a guy comes up behind us, a young guy, and he says, "Do you know that guy is 95% blind?" And he was probably in his late 80s. I said,
Wow.
and we looked at each other and said, what are we complaining about here? I'm having a challenge just walking on ground that I can see. And he's brave enough and courageous enough and persistent enough to just do it.
You
So,
know, you said a moment ago, as you started to tell that story, that the joy contradicted the grief. Um,
maybe that's the wrong word. Yeah.
yeah, it's all part of the balance, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. It's,
You
wow.
can't get either one without the other.
No, and I guess we had the presence of mind and the clarity to see that and to understand that and to embrace it. Things that happen in everyday life, I feel like you're skipping across the pond, Mark. I felt like we dove into the water for 40 days and we just absorbed all that good stuff that had left the arena over the years in the world that we all live in. It's still there. It's funny. I was saying to Allie, when you get blisters on the trail, there's things you can do about it. And we had a few, but I said, it's amazing how quickly the human body heals itself. Now, I would apply that to the human spirit on what we went through because you took away all that other stuff that we thought was important. It healed us. And part that kind of goes into the sadness saying, I want to preserve that. I don't want to let go of those lessons. So we've been back now just almost 2 weeks. We talk about it every morning just to kind of refocus ourselves on that which is important. We've done other things, Mark, as a result. We decided I've always been sensitive to people being authentic. Boy, that was ramped up because we saw people, all the titles, all the masks, are gone when you're on that trail because you're just out it with everybody else. So I want to preserve that. So we came back convinced that we were going to tighten up our circle, friends, family, acquaintances, knowing how short life can be and having an appreciation for what we witnessed. We're making that circle a lot tighter. The people in that circle will get more of our time because the people that are no longer in the circle, the inauthentic people, the people that do skip across the pond, will be gracious, will be understanding, will be thoughtful, but they're not going to get our time.
I was thinking when two things actually. One of the things you said early on in this conversation was that you felt a sense of community
Oh, yeah.
with the people who were on the Camino, and then when you were talking about the grief at losing the people that you lost while you were there, I don't want to overstate anything, but it just seems to me that you had people throw around the phrase kindred spirit. It seems to me you had already established that connection with those people because of that sense of community, which I'm taking to be spiritual. You were kindred in that quest, and then you lost them. That had to
Yes.
be tough.
Mark, you couldn't have said that better. It's like the community was there waiting to hug you when you showed up and you just became part of it. And typically, in gatherings around the world, the first thing people ask you, where are you from? Where do you go to school? Those questions don't even exist. You're just in it together. You may be talking about your experience that morning. You may be talking about, but it's not about all those other things. So we're all equal. Maybe that's the right word. We're just equal. Everything's been neutralized. And you learn to trust in the relationships immediately. I don't know these people, but I trust them.
It's funny. I had a conversation on Saturday. Um, I had gone to a gym, which is a whole other story, but I was talking to a woman there about how in the early 80s, I had come to join what was a really hardcore bodybuilding gym. And I went to that place 5 times before I had the nerve to walk in. And when I walked in, the very first thing I realized was that place was the great leveler. In that place, you couldn't tell the doctors from the bikers,
Yeah.
from anybody else. It was all one group of people, one purpose. So I would not compare that to something as spiritually loaded as the Camino, but I would imagine they're similar.
Oh, no question. No question at all. And, but what a wonderful experience to know that that kind of stuff is out there. So, wow. Gee, wow, that probably part of my normal vocabulary these days, because I just get so excited about the experience. It doesn't minimize the physical challenge or the mental challenge of having, every morning get up, got to walk another 15 miles. That's what's on the schedule. It's not like you have a choice. You do have a choice, I guess, if you want to just bail out. But over time, it became the mental commitment beyond the physical commitment. Because if the feet are working and the legs are working, now it's just, do I have the fortitude to get up every morning and go?
Yeah.
So
I want to use that to segue into our next segment. So I'm sorry about that noise.
Okay.
We'll take our next commercial break right now. We'll be back in 3 minutes, so please stay with us.
Are you ready for the quantum age?
Humanity's next step in evolution?
Dream Vision 7 Radio Network invites you to the extraordinary platform of evolutionary voices for the quantum age.
Let's explore. Learn more about this upcoming age where we bridge science with spirituality.
Where potentiality meets reality.
Where we take compassion into action.
Our trailblazers and visionaries will ask the whys, the what ifs, while igniting continuous possibility.
Come along with us into an age beyond what we know today, where we can grow together in unity consciousness.
Experience evolutionary voices for the quantum age, Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Eastern on DreamVision7Radio.com.
You can't establish your brand's authority without a voice. That's why, since 2004, O'Brien Communications Group, OCG, has been helping companies establish their authority, find their brands, distinct voices, and position their brands effectively and persuasively. So effectively that 9 of OCG's clients have been acquired by other companies. OCG's business model emphasizes efficiency and results, not hourly billing, markups, and media commissions. That ensures OCG's advice is unbiased and its clients aren't at financial risk. If you're ready to find your voice and use it to tell your story, OCG is ready to help. You can find O'Brien Communications Group on the web at o'briencg.com. That's OBRIENCG.com, or call 860-944-9022.
Calling all authors. Have you been considering an audiobook? Well, look no further. Come take advantage of Dream Vision 7 Radio Network's unique in-house audiobook production, which includes benefits and bonuses from our radio station. Let our knowledgeable staff guide you to create the audiobook you've always dreamed of without breaking the bank. Check out our full one-stop service from A to Z, including the ACX process. Schedule a free consultation by calling 508-226-1723. That's 508-226-1723. Or go to dreamvision7radio.com.
Everybody has a story. Everyone's story deserves to be told, and the only bad stories are the ones we don't share. That's why Mark O'Brien created The Anxious Voyage. It's Mark's conviction that every story deserves to be shared, and his purpose is to give people in all walks of life from any circumstances a chance to tell their stories. The Anxious Voyage is now on syndicated Dream Vision 7 Radio Network every Monday at 1 a.m. and 1 p.m. Eastern Time, with live broadcast every first and third Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Please tune in, please join Mark, and please share your stories.
This is Dream Vision 7 Radio Network, uniting mankind with universal love. Our shows are created from the heart, bringing each listener to a place of divine enlightenment. Breathe, relax, and enjoy. Let life flow.
Welcome back to the program, everyone. Thank you for staying with us. Dennis, I'm going to try to connect a bunch of dots here. I don't have the vaguest idea in the world if it's going to work. But I was thinking about something we touched on briefly before we went on the air, which had to do with, the recent events in the United States and the shooting of the former president. And I was also thinking about a word you used in talking about your experience on the Camino, which was survival. And that made me think about perseverance. And during this break, in one of the promos for the station, the word reality was used. I wonder, and sometimes I think about what's happened with CGI and cinematic technology. And if you pulled somebody out of the late 19th or early 20th century and put them in a movie theater today, their heads would be completely boggled about what's reality. Given your experience on the Camino, what do you think we know about reality, especially if we're not taking the time to be with ourselves, as you've described and as this poem, The Invitation, talks about?
Oh, boy. Well, I'm going to be a little bit repetitive, but when you're one of the glorious parts of the Camino, then I would stop and say to Allie, this is why we're here. Now, everybody has their purpose or their reason. We didn't really leave with a purpose. We ended up with one at the end because you literally go into a cathedral and there is a row of monks there and they're taking down the details, like where did you start, how far did you walk, and why did you do it? But beyond that, there's just nowhere to hide. There's no mask to wear, no roles to play. You're forced to confront your strengths, your weaknesses. You're doing it in an audience, maybe your spouse like Allie, but nevertheless. But it's enlightening at the same time. And then we get into these miles and miles of fields. And something that struck me, Mark, was the beauty. And I'm not one to be out there in nature staring at flowers, but I got completely fixated on poppies. Now, poppies are very important in England. They're a symbol of being a veteran. So on their version of Veterans Day, you'll see everyone walking around with a poppy pinned onto the lapel. Well, here, there's 4 regions we traveled across. For the first 3 regions, I was always in search of poppies. And I have a picture that I was looking at this morning, one of the metaphors for what we do for a living, I guess. There's a giant wheat field. It's going on for miles, and wheat, what is it, kind of a pale yellow color. And yet in the middle of that field, Mark, I have a picture of one poppy sticking all the way up.
Wow.
I said to Allie, that is us trying to break through this humanity for the last 10 or 12 years. And that little poppy is telling me what's possible because they didn't belong there. And they were probably overwhelmed by all the wheat. The sad thing is, by the time we got to the 4th region, which is the final region of the entire walk, the poppies disappeared. And I kept looking for them. In fact, I started to write an article last week. It's called Where Have All the Poppies Gone? Because that's a metaphor in itself. But it turns out weather conditions, what have you. I said, that may be true, but just get some guy in a crop duster and he can seed this place. But who am I to talk about poppies and flowers and all the beauty? But every time we saw the beauty, we said, wow, that's why, who gets to see this stuff?
You know what? That makes me think about environmental conditions. And I mean that in a metaphorical sense. I once had a difficult encounter with the CEO of a company who had tried to flip this thing on its head and it failed miserably and he started firing people. And I said to him, look, if you took a handful of seeds and dropped them in sand and nothing happened, would you blame the seeds? That's exactly what's going on here. You haven't created the right environment. That didn't make him happy, by the way. But I think in a larger metaphorical sense, maybe that's some of what we have to be thinking about. changing the environment in which we're trying to undertake these things. And I certainly think, and I don't mean to speak for you, but I certainly think that's germane to what you're doing with 360 Nation.
Oh, it is, Mark. Thank you. And I guess when you experience the glory or the magic of what I call the poppies, it's just amazing. They're still there. They're still growing. There's still potential. And why? Because frankly, in the area we were walking, literally untouched by human beings. This is way up in the hills, and everything's growing wild like it was supposed to. Then you have the comical moments. We're walking up this long, narrow path, and we are struggling. And there's people behind us because we're all going kind of slow. So people are catching up, and we're about 90% up the top of the path. And these are in the fields and the valleys and all this. Coming down the path, and I'm the first guy in line, is a bull, literally with horns. And then behind him is another bull. And it turned, we had to literally all kind of shift off to the path and find a way into the bush because 12 bulls were coming by in a row. Mark, there was nobody guiding them. There was nobody with anything behind them. There was no cars. They just walked by, but you weren't going to argue with them.
No.
But stuff like that. And where do you see that? And that's the way it's supposed to be. They knew where they were going. They knew how to get there. They didn't need a GPS system. They didn't need a road map. They were doing what bulls do. They were going home, I guess.
Wow, this is going to seem like an absurd connection, but Ann and I have been spending more time than we used to in the sunroom on the back of our house. And there's a nature preserve out here. And we have a family of rabbits that lives under the deck. We have at least two woodchucks that live in it used to be a shed, and it just got plowed down. We have deer. We have chipmunks running all over the place. But that occurs to me all the time. They know exactly what they're doing. And, sometimes I imagine, the animals sort of getting together and talking to each other and pointing in the window of the sunroom and saying, those two, they have no idea what they're doing. It's incredible how that works. And I think you're on mute, Dennis. I don't know what happened. But I don't think we have the chance to appreciate those other sensibilities or the sensibilities that other animals, and we're animals, other animals have.
You're right, Mark, but you got to make the time for it and find the opportunity. You don't have to go to the Camino. You can go to the nature preserve near you and take it in and get comfortable. As we know, many people are not get comfortable in that symphony of silence and see what happens.
Yeah. I usually like to leave time at the end of the show, and we have a few minutes left for people to talk about how they can be found and whatever. But in this case, because of the work that 360 Nation does, all of the various entities that it comprises, I would like to give you a few minutes to talk about that, because I don't believe that I've made my audience as aware of that as I would like to. So since you're here, and this is the last show of my contact year, next month we'll start it all over again. Would you please share 360 Nation, how it came about, and what I'm still thinking about the fact that you said you didn't discover your purpose on the Camino until the end, which seems backwards, but I believe you. So if you could just describe the purpose of 360 Nation,
of course,
and maybe how it's changed.
Yes, I'll be glad. Thanks for that question, Mark, because as you know, we don't really promote ourselves. We just let things happen and people find us. I think we have to be better at that. When I talk about shifting from rediscovering humanity to sharing humanity, we have to be more intentional now and don't presume that people know what we're talking about, particularly coming off the Camino, because you have to experience it. 360 Nation came about 12 years ago. Allie and I, through our business lives, were very blessed with enough success that we settled down here in Florida and were blessed enough that we could choose how we wanted to spend our time. we decided to spend it three different ways. One was we wanted to do something before we knew each other, we wanted to do and decided we wanted to do together, and that is give back. And when I say give back, Mark, I don't mean write a check to nonprofits. I mean our time, our talent, and our treasure. All three of those. Roll up our sleeves and take all those skills we think we learned in business and get into the trenches with nonprofits. And I'm happy to say we did that. I'll come back around to that in just a minute. Second thing is we wanted to travel intentionally. What do I mean by that? Well, we both did all the business travel where you see the boardroom, you see the taxi, and you see the airport. And I can tell you, I had been all over the world, and Allie had been all over the world because of what we did for a living, but I couldn't tell you much about that world. So we said, we're going to start traveling intentionally, and we're going to take the map of the world out, and we're going to purposely ignore America until we're done discovering the rest of those worlds out there. And we've been on that road now for about 15 years. It's been marvelous. And then the last thing is we wanted to do something. Everybody says, well, if you're going to technically retire, you got to keep your mind busy. Well, I wasn't ready to do crossword puzzles. Frankly, we didn't want to do pickleball for two reasons. We weren't old enough, and we won't do that unless they change the name to something more manly. So we said, I'm going to start a website. And I remember sitting at Allie's sister's dining room table about 13 years ago in Southampton, England. And I came out with that. I'm going to build a website. And they both looked at me and said, you're not a technical guy. You don't do that kind of stuff. I said, precisely. And then that became the theory of what if we did a website, number one, without a technical guy, so they don't just deliver you a website in a box that looks like everybody else's, but we built it based on two different things. Number one, putting our writers first, letting them drive the bus versus us. And number two, do it for good, not for profit. What would happen if you just took off all the shackles? Now, we're blessed to be able to do it because we had to invest in it. But it's 13 years later, and it's been a remarkable ride. So we haven't wavered from our mission. And the mission from day one was to rediscover humanity. And Mark, we had no idea where that was going to go. We just figured it's time. And that was the world 13 years ago. So if we show up, if we're present, if we just do our best, and if we truly walk our talk, what could possibly happen? Well, here we sit on the writer's side. We've got almost 1,300 writers. We've won 2 awards now around the world. We've launched GoodWorks 360, which is a foundation entirely dedicated to consulting with nonprofits around the world without an invoice. It's always free. And we continue to travel, which complements our understanding of different cultures and how different we are, but also how we're all the same. It's like neutralizing that on the Camino. Everybody was from everywhere else, but we didn't know it. We were all in it together.
Yeah, it's better understanding the world you serve. And for my own perspective, I just want to re-emphasize the writing and publishing part of the work you do, because I can't remember how many years you've been publishing my lunacy, 4 or 5 anyway, and I still tell people I'll never forget my first reaction, which was, what? He's not going to edit that? So, you are giving people, literally people all over the world, opportunities they otherwise wouldn't have. And especially as it pertains to writing, because it's just so close to my heart. I very much appreciate that, certainly for everything you've done for me, but for what you continue to do for other people as well. It's unbelievable.
Well, thanks, Mark. Thanks, Mark.
I thank you. I thank you for being on the show with me today. This was, wow, more than I expected. And you and I have, we've bantered, I should say, bandied the word love around before, and said to each other, well, why don't we just tell each other that we love each other? So I'm going to tell you I love you, my friend.
Well, thank you. I love you back, my friend.
And I'm so grateful. And please do give best wishes from all of us to your wife, Allie, for her recovery. And for all of you who were good enough to join us today, thank you as well. I will be back with the first show in August and send some announcements out ahead of that. Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay.
Thank you for tuning into The Anxious Voyage, the program dedicated to sharing stories, helping people, and celebrating life. You can see and listen to The Anxious Voyage on syndicated Dream Vision 7 radio network every Monday at 1 a.m. and 1 p.m. Eastern Time, with live broadcast every first and third Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern. If you have a story to tell, or if you know someone who does, please email the host, Mark O'Brien, at mark@o'briencg.com. In the meantime, please remember, the only bad stories are the ones we don't share.
This is Dream Vision 7 Radio Network, uniting mankind with universal love. Our shows are created from the heart, bringing each listener to a place of divine enlightenment. Breathe, relax, and enjoy. Let life flow.